This week on the Shameless Podcast.
So what on earth is better about buying a business or acquiring a business compared to the idea of starting up a business? I mean,
it's really simple. Most startups fail, like 96% of them fail within the first 5 years. When you have a startup, you have nothing. I'll use your analogy. You open up the hood of a startup. You may have a motor there or it could be empty. But when you have an existing business, I guarantee you one thing. When you open up the hood, there is a motor there. And the car goes. So for people that are selling a business, there's three key things when you're running a business. Number one, you want to run your business like you have to sell it. Number two, I ask business owners, what keeps you up at night about the business? Every business owner has something that keeps them up at night about the business. Buying a business is complex. There's 23 steps in the process. What we do, the way everything is based, is we reduce everything to very digestible small pieces, bite-sized pieces. The first thing I will tell you is the numbers in the business, the financials, the revenue, profits, cash flow, working capital, balance sheet, all of that, the whole financial picture. That's the easiest part of this whole process. Numbers are numbers. Numbers don't lie. People lie. They are or they aren't.
And before 12, were you always curious about business, or did you sort of develop that from observations or from environment?
At the 12 years old, I always had a job. So at the 12 years old, and then I had part-time work. My parents were hardworking people, come from a lower middle-class family. My mother at one point, I remember having 3 jobs at one point. You always had to work in my house. So, my father would never offer to give you a couple of bucks if you didn't have a job. So I was always looking to hustle and make some money. And probably because, it's just, you wanted your parents could only afford so much. And so if you wanted certain other things, you had to go out and buy them yourself.
Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story.
Shameless.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode. My name is Zikamai Gangaido, and guess what? We have got yet another amazing guest on our podcast, and I'd like to welcome Richard Parker today. Hey, Richard.
How are you? Nice to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Well, Richard, I am absolutely fascinated into the idea of buying a business, but I am terrified. I understand that you might be the man who might be actually able to help me unlock some of this terror that I feel in my bones.
To unterrify you?
Unterrify me.
Unterrify? Yeah, so that's a great line. I'm going to start telling people we're in the unterrifying business. Yeah.
Unterrifying business.
Yeah, well, I get it. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. So I understand the mindset of anybody thinking about, going into their own business, whether it be starting one or buying one. I'm a staunch believer of buying an existing business versus a startup. Although I think it's wonderful if people, have the initiative to do a startup or two in their lifetime, because it's usually generally good learning. But I've come to the very clear conclusion that, buying an existing business is the way to go. And so I am, I'm very well-versed in all of the emotions that people have, someone in your situation or others that are thinking about doing this, and will tell me, how do I pull the trigger or take a leap of faith or all these things? I don't see it that way. I don't think it's really a big leap of faith or a big risk or a big gamble if you do it the right way. I mean, but again, I'm very sensitive to, and I understand that sort of attitude looking at it. I was in the same shoes, so I went through that. But it's buying a business. It's not difficult. It's just complex. And so, the goal anytime you have something complex, you want to just reduce it to bite-sized pieces. But, getting back to your original point, ask me as many questions as you want, and I'm going to unterrify you.
Terrify me. And so the thing is, I'm going to just tell the listeners exactly what you do. So Richard Parker has been helping people achieve their dreams of owning a business for over 30 years. Is how to buy a good business at a great price program has sold over 100,000 copies in more than 80 countries. So, Richard, I've got a question.
Ask away. You could ask
out of the 80 countries, which of the top 3 that are really like been a surprise to you in terms of how the absorption or how the interest has been in your program?
Great question. So I always had some surprising ones. And over the years, I used to keep a log of every country, and there are countries that I didn't even know exist, several years ago with like Azerbaijan or places like that. And we've all over Eastern Europe and some islands in the Pacific, which, I had to Google them to see where they were, which is the beauty of the internet. So in order of rank, I'll answer this in two ways.
Yeah.
In order of rank and activity, the United States, Canada, UK, and South Africa and Australia are our most prolific countries when I say the number of programs that have been ordered in each of those countries. So again, US, UK, Canada, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. We're seeing more and more coming from India in the last little while. I would say, and I guess that's your region, South Africa has always surprised me.
Yeah.
Australia, probably based on, I grew up in Canada, so I understand, the population of Canada and Australia is similar, and they're both Commonwealth countries, originally part of the British Empire. They're both really socialist countries for the most part. I joke with my wife; she's from Australia. She's from Australia. I tell her they're all communists, but they really are socialist. Yet the level of capitalist, or capitalist mindset is really high. So even though the social programs or the platform, if you will, of the country of Australia and Canada is socialist, make no mistake, these are very capitalist societies with lots of entrepreneurs. So I've always found that interesting. And, and again, we've had some countries that are just, had to look at them at Google to figure out where they are. South Africa is kind of interesting too, because you see such a... Go ahead.
South Africa, why do you find that peculiar? But at the same time, what do you think resonates about your program to people in South Africa?
So part of me was always shocked because, living in America, you get, of course, world news and what have you. I've never really, I haven't visited South Africa. Hope to go there one day. But I guess the world's perception, maybe it's a dumb perception or the wrong perception of thinking that it's really not developed or developed as far as the United States are concerned. And you hear a lot of social unrest and government corruption in a lot of countries. So I think we have a little bit of this preconceived notion, which may be completely wrong, that the countries by and large in that region of the world are just not as advanced. And maybe part of that is true, but there's obviously a very high level of entrepreneurship. And the thing that I find fascinating about it, it really is the perfect ground, if you will, or the perfect geography for entrepreneurship, because there has always been, you've always had rich people and poor people, but not much of a middle class for many, many years. And that takes a while till the country develops. So for me, in my head and my heart, I like to see, people at the lower end of the financial spectrum who may not have the opportunities that other people have, who come from, wealthier families, especially in countries that are not as developed, to see that, that bubbling entrepreneurship. And it starts to, invade their thoughts and their plans and their hopes and the dreams. So for me, when I see people that, maybe are on the lower end as far as income or opportunities are concerned, when they start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the light's not an oncoming train, that they, it's inspiring for me to see that shift, even though we see it in a very small way. I still find it wonderful, because ultimately, you need entrepreneurship and small business to really build a thriving economy.
Yeah. And then with your program, what do you feel people might then resonate with? I mean, because there would be a multitude of programs that offer entrepreneurship, right? And so for people to then say, well, I'm going to go with Richard's program. Maybe this resonates. There's something here that resonates with me. What do you think that is that actually draws people to you?
Well, I'll answer it and then I'll explain it. I think authenticity, the internet, and with the advent of social media, you could spend days looking at, there's all kinds of stuff online, how to buy a business with no money down. You don't need any credit. There are a lot of programs out there that are complete nonsense. They appeal to people's hopes and dreams. It's almost predatory in nature, and programs that are very, very expensive. And for the most part, most of them are complete nonsense. I mean, they don't work in the real world. I never went into this for money. I never even thought this was going to turn into business. I just wanted to help. I wanted to take all my years of experience and put them into a program, because I've taken great notes over the years in all the businesses that I looked at. And I want my only goal when I went into this business, and my wife asked me the night before we went online, is how many are you hoping to sell? And my answer then is the still same answer it is now, is if I can help one person buy the right business or avoid buying the wrong one, that's perfect. That's always been our goal. It's always been the help business. And so I think I know what separates us from anything else that's out there is we're authentic. Our agenda is strictly to help people. It's practical information. It's not, Harvard MBA talk. It takes what is buying a business is complex. There's 23 steps in the process. What we do, the way everything is based, is we reduce everything to very digestible small pieces, bite-sized pieces, because most people who embark on this process have never bought a business before. So the key is you got to acquire knowledge. I don't care what degree you have. If you've never bought a business, you don't know how to do it. So we take people through all of the steps and say, here's what you need to know, here's what you need to do, and here's how to do it. And it's a real practical way of going about this process, and it's successful. I think you mentioned earlier, we're very lucky. We've sold over 100,000 copies of these things. If we had taken the tack of some BS nonsense promotion, marketing, or positioning, we'd say, oh, you could buy a business with no money down and leverage it and buy great business. We probably would have sold 10 million of these things. But I don't believe in that. I think that's nonsense. I think it's misleading, and it's not the way to help people. So, we just teach a very, very practical, proven way to go about this process in a logical manner. And we appeal and talk to people. So explain to them, we understand their fears, their concerns. This is very doable. We know what they're scared of. We know how it may be dealing with a spouse who's not sure that they should be doing this. So we go into all those things, so you have the attitude of how to go about doing this and the aptitude. And so it's a combination of the two.
Okay. So I am going to come back to some of those points a bit later on, but I also want to just make sure that I do you full justice by going through the rest of your bio. Okay. So you've also been a partner with Ray Dalio and the Dalio family office for 4 years in an investment firm that was set up for for you to be able to mentor one of Ray's sons in the art of buying businesses. That must have been a really fun experience.
It was an incredible experience. It was fun. It was, there was great learning. It was exciting. I was in a world, where we had, the one thing which was nice, we had an investment firm, son Devin and I, we had an investment firm. Ray was our only investor. He was a partner. He was the only investor. When Ray's your investor, you don't really need other investors, but he really let us do our own thing, which was really nice. But my partner, Devin, was the former co-CEO of the Dalio family office. And so we had access to any one and every resource possible. And we also had the benefit of also his years with the family office. So there were wonderful things related to learning approaches, processes, procedures, systems that I had exposure to and had the luxury and was blessed to be able to work with that were very impactful. I mean, it was and incredibly helpful. And Devin and I were close like brothers. I think for anybody who follows Ray, and I guess he's got tons of followers on social media, will be aware of the fact that, Devin was killed in a car accident at 42 years old. And that was while he and I were working together. Him and I were close like brothers. He was a remarkable man in every sense of the word, but just really a beautiful soul, a terrific, right, as smartest, nicest man I've ever met. And after his tragic accident, we ended up winding down the business because it was stood up for him. We kept our investments. But it was a time in my life. You have the emotional, the personal side related to the relationship and what have you, and the really sad and unfortunate end. But and then on the business side, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, it was fascinating. And it was also one of the nicest things about that was, despite being in the universe of billionaires, if you will, it was the kindest, nicest, most down-to-earth people, and appreciative and supportive. And, the family office and Ray and his family, they were our greatest cheerleaders. So it was really a monumental time in my life that of course, Devin's accident overshadows everything.
Yeah. But
Carving that out
memories, yeah,
are unbelievable. Yeah. And the memories and the learning and the exposure, just absolutely terrific. So as I describe it, it was terrible and terrific.
Well, and to go even further around sort of some of the things that you've done is you've personally purchased 13 of your own companies plus one co-investment with purchases ranging from $50,000 to over $200 million. I think that's a widespread of purchases. To get from 50 to 200 is a really big gap. But I would like to get into that. And I also want to just lay claim, or at least say, that you appeared on Forbes, the New York Times, TheStreet.com, Entrepreneur Magazine, Inc., and over 200 articles published to your credit. I think if there are nuggets or learnings to be had, you would rank really high up there for us to be able to get some really important insights. Now, you weren't born like this. You didn't just wake up and at the age of 10 decide, well, I'm going to start buying businesses. Or did you?
It was probably at 12. It was not 10, but 12. Yeah. I wasn't born like this. I was actually born with more hair. But yeah, I started my first business when I was 12. So
you started, okay.
Yeah. I started my first business when I was 12. It was in my town where I grew up. I grew up in Montreal, and there was a local newspaper that you had to go to the store to pick up. They didn't have any home delivery, and Montreal gets really cold in the winter, and I was starting to get real tired of going there on Sunday morning to pick up the paper for my father. The paper at that point cost 15 cents, and it was the only newspaper. There was a couple of English language dailies, Montreal's French and English. There was a couple of English language dailies and this one English Sunday paper. The English language dailies were at home delivery. I just couldn't understand why the Sunday paper called the Sunday Express didn't have home delivery. So at 12 years old, I called the company and they said to me, how come you don't deliver the newspapers? I would like to start delivering them. And they allowed me to start delivering newspapers. So they would drop off a bunch of my house. They were going to pay me they were paying me 2 cents a piece. We sold them for 15 cents. But the nice thing was, so I went door to door. I got a bunch of customers on the route. When you go to do the collections, you delivered them early Sunday morning. You went to do the collections like Monday or Tuesday. People would give you a 25 cent a quarter, 25 cents, even though it's 15. So you had a 10 cent tip. Plus it made 2 cents from the paper. I built it up to a ton of papers, like hundreds and hundreds of papers. And then the Sunday Express raised their price to 20 cents and still people were still giving me the quarter. So I only made 5 cents plus the 2. So I gave routes. I got a bunch of kids in the neighborhood to take the routes, and they would do it. And I only kept the 2 cents and said, you can keep the rest plus keep the tip. And I had hundreds of them. So my allowance that I was getting from my family at that point, I think it was like 25 or 50 cents a week. And suddenly I was making $20 a week. It was crazy. So I was like this short little kid who was always had a few bucks in his pocket. So I started at 12. That's the first venture.
Wow. And before 12, were you always curious about business, or did you sort of develop that from observations or from environment, or it's just something that calling? I mean, what would you turn that down to?
Yeah, I don't think, I was a normal kid, right? So I was just worried about playing hockey, baseball, and filling my pockets with candy. At the 12 years old, I always had a job. So at 12 years old, and then I had part-time work or whatever. My parents were hardworking people who come from a lower middle class family. My mother at one point, I remember having 3 jobs at one point. You always had to work in my house. So, my father would never offer to give you a couple of bucks if you didn't have a job. If you had a job, he always asked you, do you need any money? If you didn't have a job or a part-time job, he never offered to give you any money, which was a pretty good life lesson. And so, the entrepreneurial part, I had a couple of businesses as a teenager, a disc jockey, of course, in the wintertime, my buddies and I would go shovel out everybody's walkway and driveway covered in snow to make some extra bucks. So I was always looking to hustle and make some money. And probably because, it's just, you wanted your parents could only afford so much. And so if you wanted certain other things, you had to go out and buy them yourselves. I mean, my parents didn't, it wasn't forced labor or anything, but, if you wanted some other stuff or want to do some things, you had to make a few dollars yourself. And then I ended up getting into my own business later on when I was 29 years old, where I started my first, I call it first legitimate business as an adult. And then quickly thereafter, within months, realized, if I want to grow this business, then I got intrigued with the idea of buying businesses that I could add on to my then existing startup. And I made an acquisition pretty quickly and realized that was just a wonderful path to grow by buying someone else's business that I could add on to what I was doing.
So, and you mentioned that earlier. So what on earth is better about buying a business or acquiring a business compared to the idea of starting up a business? I mean, the idea of starting up a business is it's your baby, you nurture it and grow it. The idea of buying a business is you open the hood and you don't even know what's underneath there. It's not necessarily your creation. So, I mean, why do you think that is the way to go? And you seem so adamant about it.
Okay, to me, it's really simple. When you have a startup, and most startups fail, like 96% of them fail within the first 5 years. When you have a startup, you have nothing. You just have hopes, dreams. I mean, you don't even own paper clips. Everything sounds terrific because you haven't done anything yet. So it's one of these things where it all sounds good on paper, right? But in the real world, that may not apply. When you buy an existing business, and yes, there is validity to your point, you open up the hood and it's not your baby. But when you open up the hood or you unlock the doors, you get the keys to the place, you have revenue, you have customers, you have processes, you have systems, you have employees, you have a product, you have historical financial information related to the business. So when you have a startup, I'll use your analogy, you open up the hood of a startup, you may have a motor there or it could be empty. But when you have an existing business, I guarantee you one thing, when you open up the hood, there is a motor there. Yeah. And the car goes. Now, it may need an oil change. It possibly needs an alternator. And it may not be as shiny or clean as the other one, the car next door that hasn't been used yet. But the car works. It gets you from A to B. It's reliable. All these things that you have in place, when you do this the right way, people fail in startups. The number one reason is lack of capital. And how many people that, have a startup and they never even get the opportunity to take out money till you get to the point to be able to take out a meaningful living. With an existing business, when you do this the right way, you get the keys to the business on Monday. You can take a paycheck on Friday. When you start up a business, you walk into your place on Monday, you may still be writing checks on Friday because you still don't even have any revenue. So it's like, if you compare this, you have the car analogy, but if you compare it to a race, it's like, a startup, you're in the starting blocks. And if you're in 100-yard dash with an existing business, you're 70 yards down.
That's fully understand that now. So that then requires you to, you talked about your 23 steps, and I would like really to try to play on two sides of the coin.
Okay.
If I'm somebody who is starting up a business and I would want to have an exit where I sell, what do I need to make sure I put in place to get your attention? And then I guess that answers the question of what do you look for when you're looking at a business?
Very much so. So for people that are selling a business, and I do a bit of investment banking work or representing some sellers, there's three key things when you're running a business that you have to keep in mind and work on. Number one, you want to run your business like you have to sell it. That means that books, records, systems in place so that if a stranger walks into your business plan, operating manual, etc., if a stranger walks into your place and expresses interest, you can explain it to them. They can get the very, very clear picture that the business is in good shape. You want to have spotless books and records. Spotless financials are critical. Now, the thing is with these that I'm going to talk about, not only does it put in a position when you ultimately want to sell, but while you're running the business, it's going to make it a better business. If you run your business like you have to sell it, you're going to be paying attention to all the details that you might otherwise overlook because you want to get as close to perfection as possible. And certainly, at the top of the list are the financial records of the company. So number one, run it like you have to sell it. Number two, I ask business owners, what keeps you up at night about the business? Every business owner has something that keeps them up at night about the business. If they tell you nothing keeps them up at night about the business, they're full of crap. Every business owner is worried about something. And now when you think about it in the following terms, if you have a business, for example, and what keeps you up at night, let's say you have a distribution company and you have some customer concentration, meaning you have a disproportionate percentage of your business comes from a very few number of clients. Well, understand when a buyer is coming to look at that business, but you may be able to you're comfortable with, you run the business for X number of years, you're not worried about the clients leaving, etc. So you have this customer concentration issue and it worries you, whatever, but you're still running the business. Understand someone who's coming to look at the business as a prospective buyer, any problem that you have in a business is going to be magnified by like tenfold in their eyes because they have no insight into the business. So what keeps you up at night, the business, you've got to solve for it because you may think it's sort of an incident, but a buyer may look at it as a catastrophe. And so that's point number 2 is, what keeps you up at night about the business, and you should solve for that. And the third thing is, when I talk with business owners, look at particular businesses, and there's other things they look at. The third thing is, what happens if you, Mr. or Mrs. Owner, get hit by a Pepsi Cola truck tomorrow? What happens to the business? Could the business survive? Are you the business? At 5 o'clock at night when you leave, does all the know-how, all the assets of the business leave? Is there a second tier management in place who could take over and run the business? Are there process, procedures, systems, operating manuals for the business so that someone can come in and understand what it looks like? Just imagine you disappear tomorrow. I always ask one question. I always ask sellers when I'm meeting them and discussing their business. I always ask them how much vacation they take. They usually look at me like crazy, like, hey, here's this guy. He hasn't even worked one day and he's already looking to take a vacation. But that's not the point of it. The point is I want to know how much time can the owner take away from their business? And will the business run on its own? When they're on vacation, are they getting called all the time? Do they have to be there? You get some owners, they're lucky to take a few long weekends a year. That's not a business that's put systems and infrastructure into place. I want to meet the guy who tells me, or the lady who tells me that she takes, 8 weeks of vacation a year and doesn't call the office. That's the person I want. That's the business that I want. Because they've put processes, procedures, systems in place. So those are my 3 things, call them bumper stickers. Run your business like you have to sell it. What keeps you up at night? And what happens if you get hit by a Pepsi truck? And you're right. The flip side of that, those are things that you want to dig into as a buyer.
And so these elements that you sort of highlighted on the 3, evidently, obviously there's going to be some objective aspects and then some subjective aspects, right?
Yes.
So when you're looking at sort of numericals, numbers, what would that look like? What would those be? I mean, the typical thing when you cash flow, working capital, that's typically the buzz. So
yeah,
that's the first half.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what are the numerical aspects of the top 3? And then where do you then sometimes use your gut? Like, where does your gut fit in all of this?
Okay. That's terrific questions. So I'm going to give, the first thing I will tell you is the numbers in the business, the financials, the revenue, profits, cash flow, working capital, balance sheet, all of that, the whole financial picture. That's the easiest part of this whole process. Numbers are numbers. Numbers don't lie. People lie. They are or they aren't. And I see way too many people over-index related to the numbers. They get neurotic about the numbers. It's very simple. They are or they aren't. It's math. 1 + 1 always equals 2. It never equals 3. It never equals -7. It's math. It's binary. It's very simple. And so going through, I would urge people, they have to learn how to read financial statements. We have a section in the course that breaks it down, but how to do this for anyone who doesn't have any experience, because they are easy to learn if you spend a little bit of time with it, because they generally follow a specific order or what have you. But the numbers are the easiest part of this whole process. And that should be absolutely, there's no gut involved. Okay. There is some thought that valuing a business is very much artistic versus scientific. I don't particularly subscribe to that. I believe you can get a lot of the art part into science by evaluating fundamentals in the business. We developed a whole valuation program that allows people to do that. But let's just say that for the numbers part of it, it's binary. So that's the easy part.
Just to confirm, you did say that is part of the course.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So we have the program. We used over 1,000 transactions, stress tested it. So the way it works basically is you plug in the numbers on one spreadsheet and then you answer 50 questions related to the fundamentals of the business. How long in business? What are the threats to the business? Barriers to entry, the competition, the condition of the inventory, the assets, etc. About 50 questions. And it weighs each one of those answers, marries it to the earnings of the business, and pumps out a evaluation for the business. And the point being here that that's not gut. That's all binary. So to your original question, there's no gut. You can't allow any gut or emotion to enter into the financial evaluation, because you can't say, you know what, yeah, the numbers say they're not making any money, but I think they're really making money. No, that doesn't work. That's it. Again, it's like you can't convince yourself. It's like me trying to tell you I have a full head of hair and I'm 18 years old. So
Just
that's binary.
From this angle, if I
On the side, it's still pretty good and still pretty good and dark, but it's fading. It's fading fast. I don't have your nice thick head of hair there. So that's it. So you can't. The numbers are never gut. As far as the business, it's very important that a buyer remains logical throughout this process. I get the point of falling into the trap of getting emotional. One thing I will tell you: gut feeling is important, but I think gut feeling should only be taken into account on the negative side, meaning sometimes you just have a gut feeling that it's just not right, or for whatever reason, or something's not right. Well, you got to trust your gut. I would never allow my gut to convince me that something is good. Okay. So here's how this goes. It's a really interesting dynamic. You have buyers and sellers, right? Sellers go into this process from a logical perspective. They have a business. It's making X number of dollars. They decide they want to retire, or for whatever reason they're selling. And they say, here are the numbers. Here's what I think my business is worth, which is usually wrong. But notwithstanding that, they go into this process as from a logical perspective. As I always said, what a seller thinks their business is worth has nothing to do with the value. But that's okay. The point being, they go into this from a logical perspective. I have a business. I have customers. I have profits. And here's what my business is worth. And I want to sell it for X under these terms. They go into a logic. Buyers go into it emotionally. I'm not happy with where I am financially in my life. I've always dreamed of owning my own business. I want an opportunity to better my life and the lives of my family. I think that owning a business is the only way that, I can improve my financial situation. I'm excited. I got to drive. All these things. So they go into it with all these emotional perspectives. So you got the seller's logical, the buyer's emotional. Well, the key is you got to flip them. The exact opposite has to happen. Meaning, and I'm talking this from a buyer's perspective, the buyer has to get logical. You have to do this in a logical way. Yes, you need to stay motivated. You need to have emotional. There's times there's ups and downs, and there's deals that fall apart, and it doesn't just happen overnight. It takes work to buy a business, but you got to do this from a logical perspective. The emotion shouldn't weigh into the equation. You should make good, logical decision based on quantifiable data. But at the same time, you want to get the seller emotional. Because then they're going to make decisions that are going to help you. So the buyer starts out emotional. They've got to get logical. The seller starts out logical. As soon as you get the seller emotional, meaning they believe that you are the right person to run this business, they start sniffing the money and mentally smelling and mentally spending it. You got them where you want them. As soon as you get them, that's why when you engage with a seller, you want to, what I teach people is, when you engage with a seller, you want to have a conversation like you and I are, Ziggy, like this. I don't want to get I don't want to get into the weeds. I don't want to get busy with the numbers. I just want to talk to you. I want to have a good conversation, and I want to establish a meaningful relationship with you. Because once we could develop that trust together, and once they see that they believe that I'm the person to operate that business, their whole idea from the beginning of what they think they're going to sell it for and what terms they are, they'll go out of their way, not always, but very often, to accommodate me because they have a legacy and they want to see the right person taking over the business. They have some sellers don't care. They just want the money. But most of them, they care about their employees. They care about their legacy. They want to see the right person taking it over. So the mindset is, when we talked about gut or whatever, it's okay to make your decision to think about buying a business from an emotional perspective, but you got to get logical quickly.
And I mean, but that's beautiful, because I guess you acknowledge both sides of the coin, right? There's an emotional aspect to it and there's a logical aspect to it. And you have to be wary about where you're sitting as you're having these discussions. So I really find that fascinating. And then if I'm afraid, and I'm going to go back to that, if I'm afraid to make my first step towards terrifying. How do you break that fear down so that I can actually take a step? What are the things how would you sort of help me overcome that hurdle?
Well, you're not going to start off with 100% confidence. That's very normal. Anything, the fears, concerns that you have related about potentially doing this are very normal. And I explain to people that all of those parts of apprehension that you may be feeling, or fear, as you say, those are normal. And you know what? It's good to have fear. What you want to do is you want to have, during this process, you want to have a combination of fear and excitement. The excitement is going to keep you going. The fear is going to force you to do things the right way. So it's good to have those emotions. So when people go into this, anybody who's fearful of this, I actually commend them because they're smart. People who aren't fearful usually are too cocky. They think, well, I'm going to do this. How hard can this be? Well, that's going to get them in trouble because you know what? It's not hard, but it's complex. And if you've never done this, it's not going to be easy. So it's good to have fear. Fear is healthy. I mean, I really encourage it because if you're not fearful, you're going to be sloppy. So fear will force you to be diligent. Now, there's a bigger piece at stake here, which is you have this massive fear at the beginning. Okay. And so what you have to do, it's just like, with a kid. When a kid's, that old expression, you got to walk before you can run. You've got to address this whole process like in manageable pieces and realize as you start to make some progress, your confidence starts to build. If you align yourself and set up yourself with mentors of people that have already there and have accomplished what you want to do, they help guide you along the way. They act as your Sherpa along the way. And that of course is really important. I will tell people that, I don't come from a fancy background. I just wrote a post on this related to LinkedIn because of the time of the year. And, I don't come from a fancy background. I don't want a pity party. I don't come from a fancy background. My parents didn't give me any money. They didn't have any money. I never went to university. I don't have an MBA. This is very doable. This is as doable as it gets. Anybody can do this. Yeah, it's not like falling off a log easy, but it's very doable. And your fear could be managed. I wouldn't want someone to eliminate their fear because again, we talked about it keeps them diligent. I just think that people who have any ounce of interest in becoming an entrepreneur owes it to themselves to at least learn about what's involved. Then you can decide if you want to do it or not want to do it. But you owe it to yourself. If not, you go through a year, 5 years, 10 years, or a lifetime and always look back and say, you know what, I wish I would have, could have, should have done that. So at least you can go through this process and learn along the way and do it in a methodical way. The fear and concern and risk and all of those things, it's all normal. It's all part of it. And whatever you're feeling, for example, if you're feeling that right now, line up another 100 prospective buyers, 90 of them are feeling the exact same thing. So it's very normal. So you solve for it by progressing diligently and by learning and by having the right knowledge and information to be able to go about the process in an effective way.
That is very insightful. And with that, I am going to say the quote for the day, which is the signal that I'm wrapping this up.
Okay.
The quote for this episode is, being an entrepreneur is a mindset. You have to see things as opportunities all the time. And why that resonates with me, especially in this discussion that we had, is that despite Australians and Canadians being a base of socialism, sitting on a base of socialism, you laugh, but at the end they have the capitalist opportunities that still exist and still thrive within a space and within a platform that one might not necessarily always join those two worlds together. And even when you didn't want to go get the mail in the cold for your dad at the age of 12, you identified that opportunity that existed and you called them up and you said, hey guys, I'm willing to pick up and do home deliveries. And despite them even increasing their prices, you said, I'm going to hire more people. I won't be selfish or greedy. I will take the 2 cents. They'll take the tip on the quarter. And yet you grew growth. You were able to grow value within that process and that was only because you were able to see the opportunity. Sometimes mindsets are a function of your environment. And when you spoke about how your father would not look to help you if you did not help yourself.
Right.
I guess for me, that speaks volumes as to how you then look at the world. Nothing comes as a free lunch. And you put in the good work, you put in the hard work, and you have to hustle to look for the things that your parents necessarily might not have been able to afford. And so it is not necessarily a surprise to me when you answer the question about fear from the perspective of opportunity, because your mindset has a lot of those sort of markers, if I can call it that. Yes, 96% of startups fail, but if you look at it from this perspective of acquiring a business, you actually get rid of a lot of the risks that might come with that, a lot of the heartache that might come with that. And when you open that hood, there's definitely an engine and it's definitely working, especially if you've gone through the right level of discipline and due diligence. Your 3 points about how to sell your business or how to select a business to buy is run it like you have to sell it. What keeps you up at night, and solve for that. And don't get hit by a Pepsi-Cola truck. Or if you do get hit by a Pepsi-Cola truck, just know that everything is in order so that things can continue. And those are the things that, form the basis of a really great business. And the emotions, 1 + 1 will always be 2. Let's not let the financials get taken over by emotions. They form a large portion of what is needed. And at the end, where the emotions come in is, number 1, being able to understand which side of the emotional scale, whether you're being logical or emotional, whether you're a buyer or a seller. That's very important from a self-preservation point of view. But at the same time, maybe it might not be such a bad thing to have the emotions tell you to stop or slow down on the negative, as opposed to selling the dream in an emotion. And these things are some of the aspects that we discussed. And I have to really take my hat off to you, because the 23 steps within your program sound, and I haven't taken the course. You've brought it forward and you've really sparked that curiosity. I guess it's a combination of what you said, fear and excitement is good. The fear makes sure that you learn, and the excitement is what keeps you moving. For anybody who's taken a lot of interest in what Richard has put forward, the link in the bio and or in the description, please just click. The first step towards being progressive, towards taking the next step, is clicking the next button, and that button is in the description. Beyond that, for those of you who don't click, at least I hope this episode has provided an insight, because it's definitely done so for me. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. And
thank you.
I've
I
actually
appreciate
enjoyed that.
I appreciate you having me, and I marvel at your summary, which was great. A lot of people, I do a lot of these. A lot of people nod their head and what have you, but you hear and you listen. It's a great attribute. So, and most of all, I really appreciate you having me, and wonderful to spend time with you. And I hope we can get to do so again. And most importantly, hopefully your audience finds some nuggets that help them get onto the path to entrepreneurship.
Now, I myself did not have the level of conviction about buying a business. After this discussion, I'm actually just like, I should really rethink the way that I see that avenue, as opposed to a more traditional starting your own. So. Right. Thank you so much.
Rethink it and learn about it. And again, Ziggy, thank you very much again for having me. I really enjoyed our time.
Thank you very much.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.